Hello there, and welcome to the first in the series of More Than the Song, an opportunity to discuss the voice and sung worship within the Salvation Army. Music Editorial are conducting interviews and conversations with a variety of choral leaders and champions of vocal music, with the aim to receive inspiration, sound teaching, and hopefully re-energize those of you who have a love for singing in current times. Today, as you'll see, I'm joined by Dr. Harold Burgmayer. I'm sure many of you will be already aware of Dr. Harold's work, but a quick introduction for those who haven't. Harold became the Music and Gospel Arts Secretary for the Salvation Army's USA Central Territory in August of 2015. And even more recently, Harold has been appointed as the leader of the newly formed Central Territory Staff Songsters. Prior to that, Harold served as the Divisional Music Director for Eastern Pennsylvania and Delaware for over 30 years. Within that time, he led Pendle Brass and Singers, excellent groups who recorded 16 albums during that time and travelled across the world ministering to many people. And also, as well, Harold has a lot of experience at a local level with musical leadership at a core. Harold completed a master's degree and gained his doctorate in music composition from Temple University in Philadelphia, and has an extensive output with over 400 arrangements and compositions, from kids' songs to even a full symphony, I think, for a full orchestra. And with his wife Priscilla, they have appeared as guest clinicians specializing in the training of singers and instrumentalists. But in all of this, it's evident that Harold recognizes the influence and his commitment to God in his music making. So it's a privilege to be able to have this conversation with you today, Harold. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
You might find it interesting that we've named the series More Than the Song, clearly taking inspiration from the Matt Redman song, as this series is about getting to the heart of worship. However, we also recognize that beyond this deep theology within singing is the years of practice and dedication that makes a performance more than a song. This is what we'll be going into in these series of interviews. So Harold, first question, we'll jump in the deep end, a nice deep question. What makes a vocal offering more than a song to you?
It's the singers having an understanding of what they're singing. So we're looking at the text, the line, and really what is the songwriter trying to say. So it's much more than that. And of course, for us who are believers, we're trying to express and communicate something. So I'm really hoping to connect with the listener, that they would have an understanding of that. Of course, there's lots of ways that we try to do that, but I think it starts with us as a choir, as singers, really having an understanding of what we're singing and really knowing the truth that we're singing about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
yeah.
Good. And we'll kind of unpack that further as we go along. So we'll start with kind of the individual singer. So recently I've been carrying out research on vocal health and beginning to understand the importance of understanding the voice as a singer, I guess, so that you're able to use it correctly and understand everything that's going on. How important do you think it is for singers to have an understanding of the physiology of the voice?
Well, it's even more than the voice. Like, actually, I think is the whole mechanism, that is including the breathing, your posture. To me, I can tell right away singers who know how to stand, how to breathe, and then basically how to use their voice. That is to use the head, color, kind of modify vowels if we need to, those kinds of things. I think to have that understanding is important. And sometimes I'm saying or explaining or showing ways that I kind of, that we can make things happen, to make the mouth more open, throats open, things that we do, exercises to make that happen. So I think in a physiological way, we're trying to make them aware of how their voice works. And especially with children and teens, that's really effective because they want to learn about their bodies and how they work. So I think it is important to answer your question.
Yeah. So from that, as a leader, you know, how much importance do you put on in a rehearsal setting, warming up and cooling down, and kind of throughout the rehearsal? Do you kind of explain the voice and kind of good technique, or is that something you do in the warm up and then refer back to warm up? You know, how do you kind of incorporate?
So we'll have some understanding about posture, breathing. We would do some breathing, those kinds of things. And then we're talking about working through vowels, so space in our mouths, kind of shape. And that's why I'm always using kind of the eggshell analogy of, you know, a raw egg into my mouth, try to get this really tall space, or, you know, these kind of signs. But I try to do it in a physiological way that they're seeing signals from me that remind them of these things, these physical things. And then, of course, then they experience them rather than just kind of talking about the mechanism or the larynx is here or the, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and I guess using imagery.
So we do warm up to answer your question. I think it's really important, but that's a way to say what we're doing right now is making sure, do you feel the sound here or do you feel, you know, those kinds of things? Yeah. So we can come back to it when we're in the repertoire. Remember, we did this vowel this way earlier, or that kind of thing. Yeah.
You might find over time, as you kind of instill this in the choristers and the group, that actually, like you said, it's just little signals and the odd thing where you don't have to stop and explain everything to them, but over time they kind of learn your mannerisms and what you want from the sound and everything. Yeah, that's helpful. Kind of leading on from that. So during my time at music college, I had friends studying singing, and lots of them placed or prioritized ensemble work and singing in choirs, even though lots of them were training to be, you know, operatic singers and soloists. In your book, which we'll get onto later, you quote Robert Shaw, and you say that he says that you can't see the voice, you can't touch it. You frequently have to depend on someone else even to hear it. And I guess this can relate back to vocal health as well, and relying on other people to kind of point things out to you if you need, or, you know, to guide you in the right direction. But do you think that singing relies on other people being involved in the process, both from a vocal health point of view and ensemble singing? And also from that, is this as important on a spiritual level as well as a musical level, in that you're constantly surrounding yourself by other singers and working towards the same goal?
So recently, because of the coronavirus, we had to redo some tracks for Hallelujah choruses without all of the 12 singers in the room, so just 2 at a time. And how difficult this was, we didn't anticipate it. Not because you can't, it's just the idea of having the company of someone next to you that you don't realize you are feeding off of, not just to find pitch, but to join your sound with that. That's the magic of it, is that when we come together, even congregationally, that the sound is bringing you closer to that person in an intimate way that you can't experience just even in a conversation that we're having now. Something happens because the waves are being joined together. And then when you add meaning to that, we're joining the meanings of what we're singing. It just becomes very magical. So yes, it's a very spiritual thing. Mm-hmm. And the connection builds community like nothing else. Why do we sing? To celebrate in many ways, even in rallies or football games or whatever. We sing that brings people together. So there is a connection that it's hard to explain. It's metaphysical, like Robert Shaw is saying there, but yeah.
Well, that's good. And again, this can lead us on to the current situation in the world and the fact that we're not able to meet as groups and meet as people,
right,
worship together. There's been a kind of a springing of virtual choirs all over, mm-hmm. and I've seen quite a lot of discussion amongst the choral community about virtual choirs. Some are for it and completely for it, and some are on the other end and completely against it. What do you feel about that? You know, how do you feel about virtual choirs? Do you think that they're helpful, or do you think that actually, or they're not helpful?
Well, it's a stopgap, obviously, for the moment. And of course, the moment I'm learning is going to be longer than I ever anticipated. We thought we'd be off for a few weeks or whatever. Now, we're looking at maybe months that we actually can't have all 40 people in the room at a time. In the States, we're talking about just 10 for several months now. The virtual choir exercise, because you're singing to a click or something else, is just so different than me being able to kind of mold and make things happen in front of a choir and for us to work together. So it's just really difficult. It's kind of a stopgap to me. I don't see a lot of positives, although I know choirs that are rehearsing every week somehow virtually, and that's fantastic. And I feel a little guilty that I haven't figured that out, but I'm not in favor of it, no.
I guess, there's the idea that as a choir, as a group, you want to be producing the best you can be. And actually, if you're just producing the only thing that is available to you, that's not necessarily the best that you can offer, I guess. But also, on the other hand, there's the idea that keeps the choir connected in ways. But I guess there's many options and avenues to explore with keeping people connected during these times. No, it's just very interesting because I've seen so many different opinions kind of fly about that. Great. So if we move on to discuss your work as the Territorial Music and Gospel Arts Secretary, a role you've been in for almost 5 years now. So maybe during that time, those 5 years, what have you seen in your territory that has kind of encouraged young singers? Is there anything you found that is particularly effective in encouraging young singers? Or is there anywhere that you think there are opportunities to be had or, need to explore?
So this is not meant to be a negative statement, but I came to the land of band. I mean, most of the instruments in the world are actually made in the US and the Central, all the famous factories and so forth. And the idea of the singing was kind of, secondary to the banding. I want to say that, but we weren't in a situation where we could find ways to encourage singers. So first of all, we have a curriculum that we use as far as teaching reading, vocal technique called the MAP Curriculum for Voice. And we started to implement that, kind of requiring it at CMI, our Territorial Music School, and then many of the divisional music camps start to do that. This encouraged people, because I really believe that if you're not reading by age 12, 13, 14, you're not going to continue to sing. And therefore, we're really not going to have songster brigades. So I'm committed to the whole idea of reading. And of course, in this area of lead sheets without even music on it, we have less of that than when I was growing up, where you could actually open a hymnal and you would see the music there. So literacy was a big item, but also we began to really emphasize technique as well as the literacy and kind of equip people. And what I discovered was something new that I hadn't discovered in Philadelphia, was that we were equipping music theater people who were really interested, not just in drama and dance, but wanted to kind of be a triple threat, and realized that we were doing them a service by teaching them to sing. So the response has been amazing. For instance, our Territorial Music School, we had 93 vocalists last year, vocal majors. We're going to add if we had met this year, we're trying to figure out how to meet, but it's not going to be in person. But we would have added a fourth vocal group. This includes a gospel expression as well. And the other thing that's happened is many of the divisions now have some kind of divisional youth chorus or chorus that's helping to bring that back. So we have really strong momentum. And you mentioned earlier about the Territorial Songsters. We feel that bringing those people together, it's like the leaders being kind of trained and brought and kind of made more enthusiastic, is really going to affect the territory. One of the priorities about that was that every division would be represented, so it wasn't just the metropolitan area, such as the Chicago Staff Band is, but that it would truly be a territorial expression. And that way, all these ideas about singing, kind of enthusiasm for singing, will kind of go out across the territory. So that's kind of bad work. So I'm feeling really good about the kind of momentum we've had. And also, one of the offshoots is we've discovered many people that hadn't kind of been paid attention to before, but actually are quite enthusiastic singers and really appreciate the opportunity. So,
yeah. No, I think, that's a good sentiment, because I believe as well that there are more people out there that love singing and and don't realize that they love singing yet, and they need these
Right.
opportunities to kind of for them to realize that. That kind of answers a question I was going to get onto just now about the staff songsters that have recently been set up. And I know were you due to be launched? Was it this month or last month?
So yes, so basically, this has been about a year in the making. We went through a process with our cabinet, territorial administration, about what this would be, and we set a priority that every division would be represented. We went through an audition process, which a video, so that it was access to everybody. We met for the first time in January, actually during the North American Composers Forum that same weekend, and we acted as the reading choir for kids, some of the composers' pieces. And then we met, believe it or not, the last weekend that you could meet, first weekend of March here in the States, together in Kansas City, and had a fabulous rehearsal weekend and actually kind of, did a worship service. So it would have been our first kind of public performance, not knowing that we would meet. And we were to be commissioned the last weekend of April by the general, because he was in town for the National Advisory Organizations Conference, I guess it's called, that we were hosting. And so we're working on a virtual launch at the moment to kind of replicate some of that music we would have done and have our commissioner commission us as a Songster Brigade. All that seems funny in the moment because I just don't know when we'll sing together again. So, the virtual thing you asked earlier about, it doesn't feel real to me because it doesn't have the impact of being together. It's more tactile to be in the room and working together. But a wonderful group. And I will say this, holistically, I've been so impressed. The prayer partners we're having, the devotional times, discussions about the song, and the rehearsing, working so hard. It's just fantastic, the response that we've had. So this kind of delay with the coronavirus is kind of annoying. Because I just like to get back to the music, but it's hard. But we're really happy with that as a development, and the territory has been very supportive across the board as far as leadership and so forth. So we're really grateful for that.
That's really encouraging to hear. From that, do you imagine, you may have thought about this anyway, where do you see the staff songsters in a few years' time, kind of down the road? Do you see it kind of just continuing to develop as a group, but also kind of reaching out and encouraging more people to sing, as in training young singers or training young leaders? How do you see the group?
Yeah, that's totally. So the idea is, one of my things since coming to this territory is that I felt we needed to learn, even in bands as well, how to rehearse better, and that we could be a better ministry tool. And there were certain habits maybe that are a little dated to make things more work as far as communication, as far as the groups are concerned. And so I feel that I am modeling, both at the staff band and the staff songsters, quality rehearsal and also programming effectively, that we can do all of that better. And that includes Sunday morning worship planning, which is not so strong some places. So all of that hopefully we modeled, and I already feel a ripple from even these first two rehearsals that people almost on autopilot can almost say what I'm going to say about something, and kind of autocorrect things musically, but also in terms of what we're trying to say and do within the music, especially about text and those kind of things. I'm obsessed with really working the words as far as the meaning and also, as diction. So that already has translated to, it's a little bit more than a cutoff kind of thing, which is much more to music than that. So
I think for me there's a real excitement when you're watching a choir live, and you can really see that the people singing have really embodied the text, and they've really understood that, and they're really communicating that effectively.
Right.
So it's more than just the cut-offs and things. It's about the message and the intention. So that's really cool. It's really exciting because obviously we've got the Canadian staff songsters as well, relatively recently launched about 3 years ago now. And so for us in the UK, it's exciting to see these new opportunities kind of coming about. Obviously, we already have the international staff songsters, and there are different groups springing up as well around the UK. So, I think it's very encouraging, and I'm feeling very optimistic about singing, and I feel that there's a bit of momentum starting to pick up now behind that. I have your book here with me. the beat goes on. It's a very thorough book. I remember first seeing it and thinking, gosh, that looks so heavy. But actually looking at it, it's thorough. And it covers almost kind of every expression of musical worship we have in the Salvation Army, that you might find at a core level. What inspired you to kind of write this book and create this resource?
So it has to be at least 15 years ago. I don't know, maybe more than that. I started teaching. One of my main things in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, was developing leaders. So I would have, for instance, in the summer in my conservatories, 16 staff members. My intention was that they were going to bridge not only to teaching kids during the week and be well trained to do that. I'm a teacher at heart, but I'm a teacher of teachers. I'm trying to equip people to share whatever their gifts might be. And it was aimed at when they got home from the summer that they were actually going to be in front of a sing company or a junior band or be teaching kids, and they would be able to do it really well at a high level. So then I started to organize how those work. And, you have these workshops or whatever and your slideshows or whatever. Began to do those. And then I was asked by the Eastern Territory to kind of organize some of the material that made it to the book into workshops for leader training. And then it became, well, what if we made a book? And then as I got into it, for instance, I knew I would be doing the YP Songsters and chapters, band songsters. But I began to think, well, I play piano on Sunday morning and I haven't seen this written about. And so could we translate something into that about, playing the piano on Sunday morning? Then it became, well, for sure, we should talk about the praise and worship things. And then the closing chapters, the closing 5 chapters, the conducting chapters, which I'm very proud of. I wanted to touch on things I hadn't seen before. It was Dorothy Nanskiville who had read some chapters. And she said to me, but you don't talk about what happens in rehearsal when things don't go right. Where do you go next? And so those things are kind of addressed. So I was just challenged along the way to make it the comprehensive tool it was. It took a lot of discipline to do that. Honestly, it took 6 years to do the book in terms of also organizing the graphics and so forth. I have a background in architecture. And so I thought in this area that it would make the book more appealing, not just necessarily as a video that someone would stream or talk about, but that I wanted to have these tremendous, graphics, illustrations, which are there, some humorous, whatever, to help people have an understanding of how things work. So those took a lot of time, and somehow just to make a simple diagram, really clear, makes that happen. So that's part of the intent of the book. So
it's interesting.
You could hold it up so people could see the cover. My little cartoon there.
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah, it's a great cartoon.
Yeah.
Kind of flicking through and seeing those graphics you mentioned, particularly about kind of score preparation. Actually, it's really interesting. Like seeing how you mark things, and actually for me, if I've led a group, score preparation is the bit that I felt has needed to be done and is kind of a really important aspect, but actually I've not been totally sure how to approach it and how to even simply mark the score and effectively mark the score, so that when you're in a rehearsal, you can quickly glance down, know exactly what you've written, instead of writing something and completely forgetting what you meant and spending time trying to work that out. So I found that very helpful, actually. And there are, as simple as just very simple markings, have really kind of made me understand a lot more about score preparation and how to effectively do that.
That's great.
So as far as young leaders are concerned, obviously I think everyone recognizes the importance of developing young leaders, and you touched upon it with the divisional music school. We had 16 staff members, and that was to kind of help train them up to be musical leaders.
Right.
Are there any other examples of kind of that training, or when you've felt like putting you've had to put importance on that kind of training in order to kind of create the next generation of young leaders? I think one thing we might see in the army is missing generations, where leaders have kind of taken on the baton and not for, not any fault of their own particularly, but then we've seen those leaders work for a period of time, but in that time, there's been a generation kind of missed out of leadership potential and opportunity. So what are your
Yeah, so let me respond to that. When I arrived in the Central Territory, I had this, that was the most effective thing I did, was the conservatory summer. Those kids, I had them for 5 weeks. We had training every day. We'd talk about how we were doing. They were being watched as they began to teach. And of course, we were challenging to go home and do things. So that, I came really kind of full of that. And, I have successful students, including, came out of my program, Derek Lance, who's in the East, Joel Collier, who's writing great music, people like that, who came through our program, and I felt we were well equipped in so many ways, this well-rounded way. So I come to the Central Territory, and I remember saying to the commissioner early on when I arrived, I just don't see the new leaders. Like, I don't see it happen, because there were very phenomenal leaders in many places, but they'll do it for 30, 40 years, and someone else hasn't had the chance. Now, I started conducting when I was like 14, and just something wants to make you want to do that. And I felt like there's 50 kids in this territory who want to do this. Now, how do we figure this out? And so we have established, for some of the people, of course, according, similar to my model from Philadelphia, internships for the summer, where we're meeting with the kids, we're bringing them on. In most divisions now, we have one at the territorial level as well, where we're meeting with them. So what do you want to learn this summer? How can we help you? And then we're meeting and then we're putting them in camp situations where they are teaching and so forth. And we're kind of setting the thing that they're getting the experience, kind of using their hands in front of groups or teaching. There should be more at the core level. And it's true that some leaders, terrific as they are, could find the opportunity to, I don't know how we do it more, but we need to do it more, or we're going to miss a generation. My generation was a Vietnam generation. We lost so many Salvationists during that time. Is the anti-military kind of movement and so forth. And those who remained were tremendous, the Ron Wicks Norrises and Charlie Bakers of this world, who did remain in leadership. But there were so many more who I grew up with going to Star Lake, let's say, that moved on. And part of it is if they had been given an opportunity to really make something happen, because one person can make things happen. I say that in the book. Then we might have kept them, and we would have more resources, obviously. So, yeah. So that's definitely on my radar, that we need to keep giving kids opportunities to try to express themselves in terms of leadership. Yeah.
No, that's really encouraging. We'll come to a close. I've got one more kind of final question, or it might provoke some thoughts. So in your book, you include Psalm 33, verse 3, which says, "Sing to him a new song, play skillfully and shout for joy." And you discuss this call to musical excellence, but note that it's more important than just getting the notes in the right place at the right time. And you quote, I think it's Dave Williamson, that it's a summons for leaders to become experts in the styles of music which work best for their community of faith. What do you mean by kind of including that quote? What were you getting at? And does this whole idea kind of relate back to understanding the voice and understanding what is happening and kind of becoming as educated as you possibly can be, what thoughts do you have on that?
That's such an interesting question, but I'll give it. I had an expression once. I learned something for a divisional commander sent once. He made a theme for his division: my core, comma, my community. And so I worked in the inner city of Philadelphia for 30 years, and that meant that the kids who came into my program only knew hip hop music. So the question then is, do we use hip hop music so that we keep them interested? Well, we took a different perspective. That is that we would teach them music outside of their ears that became fresh and exciting for them. And this could be certain kinds of Salvation Army music, or, as we ventured into swing music or Latin music in the culture, that's closer to where they are. So where I'm going is, that meant that I have to figure out how to make a Latin piece of music. If I'm in an area that a lot of people are speaking Spanish, that meant that I needed to learn how to do a rehearsal in Spanish so that I wouldn't have that roadblock of translation or the kids are laughing at me because I don't know what I'm saying. That meant that we had to become a larger person. So you're going outside of maybe your training to learn another genre so that you can communicate or connect in the community where you are. So that's the basis of my answers, like my core, my community, what has to happen musically to make our worship attractive on Sunday morning to our community so that we can be effective and have outreach. So there's a bit of sacrifice there. It's a lot of sacrifice, actually. But, you know, it was the same for me with children. I learned anything I know that you read in that book I think I say this, from the piano bench, because I played for my wife, who's just is so intuitive about kids' voices. And it's intuitive enough to change my own songs. You know, I'd give her a song and she'd say, no, it should go like this, you know. But the point was, I wanted to be able to do that when I traveled as a divisional music director. I wanted to be as good as she was. That meant I had to learn things another way. So I started attending conferences about kids or boys choirs or whatever, trying to show that I could become expert as well. So it's just widening your kind of palette of maybe how you grew up so that you can be effective where you are and in your ministry. That's kind of where I'm going with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of highlighting, you said about traveling to conferences and courses and things outside of the Salvation Army. Do you think that there's a benefit from reaching out and kind of learning from other people, other organizations or other cultures, you know, how to lead, or singing wise, you know, how do you feel about that, and using things outside of the Salvation Army and bringing them in?
Oh, absolutely. So, for instance, for us with children's choirs, Helen Kemp was kind of the guru of women's choir people. I had no idea that she was a half an hour from my house until after she passed away. But I went to see her at a conference once, big choir, children's choir, and she gets them quiet just by tapping fingers, you know. And I watched this and I thought, no, I got to figure this out. I should be able to control this many kids this way. But also her techniques, which are in the book, pretty much we give her credit for that. I had the same thing with Anton Armstrong, who was a very famous choir conductor, St. Olaf Lutheran. I went to see him in a boys' choir thing, and I thought, no, I can figure this out. I can do this. I want to be as good as these guys. So I don't see that, you know. So that's kind of, I aspire to that. The same if I go to American Choral Directors Conferences, and, you know, you run into the really best people, the best composers, and you want to figure out how they get that sound. So yeah, I really believe in that. And also going to programs, you know, Christmas, you have this opportunity to hear music outside of kind of our Salvation Army sphere performed and sung at a high level because it's Christmas, you know, just going to a lot of things to hear things, not just kind of through my phone, but actually live, you know, experience that and watching the conductors and so forth. So yeah, we learned from that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think further on in this kind of video series, I'm going to be chatting to Dr. Ron Smart, and I'm quite looking forward to that because he's had such an influence kind of in the choral world, you know, and kind of with international competitions and all sorts. So I'm looking forward to kind of learning from him as well. But it's good to hear, you know, that you encourage kind of learning from outside of the Salvation Army as well, and using that, bringing that in. That's really good. I've got to the end of my questions, so thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything you want to add, or are you happy to kind of finish up?
I'm good, thank you. I really appreciate this privilege just to share. Thank you. Great.
No, thank you for joining. Thank you. It's much appreciated.
I'm encouraged by it. Thank you.